Welcome. We're trying something a bit different today, a new in-depth approach to book coverage with this extended summary. Unlike our usual review, which is more of a focused analysis, this is a comprehensive overview. We're going to trace the intellectual roots, the key arguments, and the real-world impact of our subject. And we'd love to know what you think. If you find this expanded format helpful, please let us know. Your feedback really does help shape what we do next. So let's start with a question. We all live in a society where, almost everyone can read. We tend to assume that literacy is the same as reading ability. But let me ask something a little provocative. When you pick up a really challenging book, say a dense piece of philosophy or science, are you really reading it? Or are you just decoding the words on the page?
That's the exact question at the heart of this. Mortimer J. Adler's premise is fascinatingly blunt about this. He argues that in a mass-literate society, most of us can sound out the text, sure, but very few have ever been trained to read for genuine understanding.
Right, and the book we're diving into today is essentially the manual designed to close that gap.
It is. We're talking about Mortimer J. Adler's landmark guide, How to Read a Book, the classic guide to intelligent reading. Specifically, we're looking at the big 1972 revision he did with Charles Van Doren. This is a text that really aims to transform reading from a passive act into a very active, disciplined skill. And just a quick note on how we're doing this. You are experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation powered by Google's Notebook LM, which allows us to create these deeper, more dynamic summaries.
And this book isn't just a simple self-help guide. It's really a rigorous piece of educational philosophy, but it's presented as a practical manual. It lays out exactly how you can move from being just a functional reader to what he calls an intelligent reader.
Someone who can actually learn from an author who is, intellectually superior to them. That's the key. And what's so critical to grasp is the structure. The authors map out this comprehensive four-part methodology. It's incredibly systematic.
Okay, so where does it start?
You begin by understanding the basic dimensions of reading itself. Then you move into the really intense discipline of analytical reading, learn how to adapt that for different kinds of books, and then you reach the highest level,
Which is?
comparative, or what they call syntopical reading. And the whole context is really that 20th century Western nonfiction tradition, the great books.
All right, so let's unpack that core framework. The entire method is built on what they call the 4 cumulative levels of reading. I think that word cumulative is key.
It's everything. They build on each other. You can't just jump to the end. So level number 1 is the foundation, elementary reading. It's basically what we all learn in school.
Just basic literacy.
Exactly. Functional literacy. Recognizing words, understanding simple sentences on a surface level. If you can read a news article, you've mastered this level.
Then you get to level number 2, and this requires a bit more intention. It's called inspectional reading.
And this is all about managing your time and filtering information. Adler even calls it systematic skimming.
So the goal isn't deep understanding at this stage. Not at all. The goal is a quick, superficial read to figure out the book's main topic, its structure, and most importantly, is this book even worth the massive effort that level 3 is going to demand?
It's an intellectual triage, really. In a world with so much information, you need a way to quickly assess things. Inspectional reading lets you dismiss books that won't teach you anything new and prioritize the ones that will.
And that's where level number 3 comes in. Analytical reading. This is the real heart of the book, isn't it?
It is. This is the demanding, in-depth process you save for books that have proven they're worth your full attention. You're not just reading anymore, you are dissecting the work.
Structurally, interpretively, you're trying to understand precisely what the author meant, long before you even think about judging it.
And that leads to the pinnacle, level number 4, syntopical or comparative reading.
And here, the individual book sort of becomes less important.
In a way, yes, it becomes a resource. The reader starts to construct their own independent view on a subject by analyzing multiple books on that topic. You make the authors talk to each other, even if they live centuries apart.
What I find so interesting is that underlying all of this, especially the higher levels, is this philosophy that reading has to be an active effort.
Oh, absolutely. It's not a spectator sport. The authors use this metaphor of reading as a conversation.
But it's a strange conversation.
A very strange one, because the author is almost always the superior intellectual partner in that conversation. If you just sit there passively, you learn nothing.
So you have to engage.
You have to mark up the book, take notes on key terms, reconstruct the arguments in your own mind. You have to make yourself teachable.
And part of being an active participant in that conversation means you're constantly asking questions of the text. But they're not random questions, they're very structured.
A systematic inquiry built around 4 core questions.
Okay, let's go through them. Question number 1 is the big picture. What is the book about as a whole? You're looking for that single, unifying argument.
And then question number 2 drills down into the details. What is being said in detail and how?
So this is where you move from the overall theme to the specific propositions, the claims, the evidence, and the sequence of the argument.
Right, and now comes the part that really separates this method from, simple book reports.
Question number 3, whether it is true in whole or in part. And this is so hard for us because we're so used to judging immediately.
We are, but the discipline here is that you cannot assess the truth of an argument until you fully, and I mean fully, understand it.
You have to be able to state the author's case as well as they did.
If you can't do that, you're not ready to judge. And then finally, question number 4, what of it?
The consequences.
The consequences. What are the implications? If you accept what the author says, what follows? It forces you to connect the book back to the world.
This is a perfect point to get into the real engine room of the whole system. The rules for analytical reading. Level number 3.
This is where they systematize the entire process of gaining a thorough understanding. It's not just advice, it's a sequence of required steps.
And these rules are broken down into stages, right?
Exactly. 3 phases. The first is about understanding the structure. The second is about interpreting the content. And only then, the third phase, criticism.
Let's start with those structural rules. The first one is incredibly demanding. You have to be able to state the unity of the whole book briefly, in a single sentence or maybe a short paragraph.
Right. If you can't say what Plato's Republic is about, its central purpose, in a clear, concise way, you haven't really grasped its structure yet.
And after that, the second rule is to outline its major parts.
You have to see how the whole is broken down, the major sections, the order of the arguments, and how those parts relate back to the unified whole you just defined. You're basically creating an architectural blueprint of the book.
Okay, so once you have the structure mapped, you move on to interpretation.
And this is where it gets really difficult for a passive reader. The third rule is that you have to identify the author's key terms. And crucially, you have to come to terms with the author.
Meaning you have to understand the words the way they meant them.
Precisely. The insight here is just profound. If an author uses a word like justice in a very specific philosophical way, and you're just reading it with your everyday definition,
You'll completely misunderstand the entire argument.
the whole thing falls apart. You have to agree on their vocabulary first.
Then the fourth rule is to extract the main propositions. These are the core statements of knowledge the author is trying to get across.
They're the building blocks of the argument, and the fifth rule builds right on that. You have to identify and reconstruct the author's arguments.
You have to see how those propositions you just found logically support the main thesis.
Exactly. You trace the chain of reasoning.
And then there's this final hallmark of understanding, the sixth rule, which is just. It's so demanding. You have to figure out which problems the author was trying to solve, the big questions that led them to write the book in the first place.
And then, after you've finished, you have to determine which of those problems the author actually solved within the text.
Which is a huge insight. Adler points out that many authors are brilliant at identifying problems but completely fail to solve them.
And a good reader knows the difference. You learn to separate the author's ambition from their actual achievement.
This feels like a good place to pause for a moment. I just want to briefly mention Mindful Moments, which is our YouTube channel. We offer AI, book analysis, summaries, and critiques there, all designed to inspire reflection and rational thought. It's also a really valuable resource, we think, especially for aspiring authors who are looking to perfect their own craft. Okay, so let's get back to that third and final phase of analytical reading, the very demanding task of informed judgment.
Right. And as we've been saying, understanding has to come before criticism. The whole system is built on that kind of intellectual humility.
Before you can critique, you have to be able to restate the author's arguments fairly, in your own words, so fairly that the author would say, yes, that's what I meant.
It immediately moves the conversation beyond just, oh, I liked it or I didn't like it.
And that judgment, when you finally make it, has to take specific, almost clinical forms. You don't just get to say, I disagree.
No, you have to agree, disagree, or suspend judgment. And for each, you have to give precise reasons that are framed by the text itself.
And the criticism is really based on identifying if the author is one of four things. First, are they uninformed?
Meaning, do they lack essential knowledge that's relevant to their argument? Second, Are they misinformed?
So are they asserting things as fact that are just demonstrably untrue?
The third is, are they logically inconsistent? Does their own argument contradict itself somewhere?
And fourth, are they incomplete? Meaning, did they fail to address all the necessary angles or make all the important distinctions on the topic?
And notice how all four of those force you, the reader, to engage with the author's logic and evidence, not just your own feelings about it. So once you've mastered this general method, the book then gives you type-specific guidance. And this is so important because you don't read every book the same way.
The rules have to adapt. A self-help book has a different purpose than a history book.
Right, exactly. So take a practical book, something that's aimed at action, like a business strategy book. Your focus changes. You're looking at the proposed ends and means.
Are the actions they suggest actually achievable? Are the goals even worthwhile? The book's success is judged on whether it could produce results in the world. But contrast that with reading, say, a history text. There you need to pay sharp attention to the narrative, sure, but even more to the evidence.
You're constantly asking, does this evidence actually support this conclusion? Are these anecdotes typical, or are they just cherry-picked to make a point? Then with philosophy, it's different again. You have to track definitions, follow incredibly complex arguments, and even be okay with problems that the author might leave unsolved.
Because sometimes the journey of the argument is the whole point.
It often is.
And all of this work, all this skill, it culminates in that final level of mastery. Syntopical reading. Level number 4.
This is where you really transcend the role of being a student of one book and you become the teacher of a subject. You're using many books as raw material to investigate a single topic that you have formulated.
It sounds incredibly systematic.
Oh, it is. It starts with compiling a huge working bibliography of every book that might be relevant.
And then you inspectionally read all of them.
Just to check for relevance, you're not reading them closely yet. You're just trying to see if they actually address your specific topic. That probably cuts the list down a lot.
And this is where I think the real intellectual magic happens. The next step is to create a neutral vocabulary.
Yes, this is brilliant, because author A and author B might use the same word to mean different things, or use different words to mean the same thing. You, the reader, have to create your own consistent set of terms.
So you're forcing them all into a single conversation on your terms.
You are, and then you use that neutral vocabulary to organize the problems, the issues, and the different positions that all the authors take. The syntopical reader is building an independent, structured understanding of a subject. The original books are just resources for that project.
So when you pull back and look at this whole systematic approach, what does it really tell us about the goal of reading?
I think the book is making this powerful case for radical intellectual self-education. It places this huge responsibility on readers in a democratic culture.
The idea that our opinions must be earned through deep understanding.
Yes, and it confirms that understanding complex works is an achievable, trainable skill. It's not some kind of innate talent that only a few people have. It really isn't. And since it first came out in 1940, and then especially after the big revision in 1972, after World War II with Charles Van Doren, How to Read a Book has just cemented its place. It's the classic guide for any serious reader, any autodidact, who wants a system for tackling demanding texts.
It really does show you how to take control of your own intellectual growth. To continue this discussion, click the link on screen for our in-depth book critique. Please subscribe, share, and consider purchasing the book through the link. And as always, think rationally.
See the many genre-based book podcasts at Mindful Moments. Subscribe and nourish your mind on the go.